And a very good evening to all of you today. The date is Monday, August 16, 2021. My name is Vinny Miletti, and I am the owner, founder, lead partner here at Miletti Law, the law office of Vincent Miletti. You could find us on the internet, on Google, at www.milettilaw.com. That's www.milettilaw.com. And this video today is being brought to you by, just what's going on recently in Florida. We had the moratorium of evictions. The moratorium on evictions in Florida has now expired. Joe Biden a couple days ago, I guess, decided he wasn't going to go ahead and extend it. The CDC gave their guidance about extending the evictions process, the moratorium on evictions. But as we know, the CDC does not write law. They only give recommendations. Why they're giving recommendations on evictions, I don't know, nor do they have any reason to do so, but whatever. So the point is, though, so today we're just discussing very briefly evictions in Florida. So the title of this video is going to be the Miletti Law Guide to Evictions in Florida. The Miletti Law Quick Guide to Evictions in Florida. The Miletti Law Quick Guide to Evictions in Florida. All right, so let's get down to it. So we know now, tenants have, landlords have issues with tenants. Now, in the People's Republic of New York, you can't evict anybody. I think there's a moratorium until like October 31st or something, which I'm sure it's going to be extended indefinitely because whatever, no one wants it. Just landlords have no power in New York. But, in Florida, as we know, DeSantis is a little more gangster than Cuomo was, who's been going to be replaced shortly. So in Florida, you still, as a landlord, still have some rights, okay? So, when it comes to evictions, look, there's really two questions you got to ask, right? When it comes to evictions in Florida. The first question is going to be, question one, was it because they failed to pay rent, okay? So that's the first question. If the eviction was based on their inability to pay rent, it's either yes or no. If it's yes, there's a statutory 3-day notice that's where you demand payment. This statutory 3-day notice could be sent by mail, could be served, or could be left at the residence if, the tenant is working during the day or whatever. You can't seem to catch a tenant. But it's, generally pretty easy, right? So you have your 3-day, question one, if it's because they did not pay rent, okay, yes or no, the answer is yes. If it's yes, you have a statutory 3-day notice you give them, and then here's where the cycle begins. If they pay rent on that statutory 3-day notice, depending on what they pay, if they pay rent in full, problem solved, okay? You provide them a receipt, they pay in full, and you document it, it's all over. If they don't pay in full, if they partially pay, whatever the case is, and you accept it, then what you would do at that time is you would place whatever court it is on notice of the partial payment. You would give them another 3-day notice, and the cycle would return. So let's say, for example, you are looking for $100 for the month's rent, and you give them 3-day notice for paying the rent. You didn't pay this month $100. I'm gonna need something. I need my $100. They pay you $50. You take that $50. Okay, this is acceptable for now. You put the court on notice at $50 rent. And then you give them another 3-day notice with the remainder, which is an additional $50. And the cycle continues until they actually pay you in full, until it's satisfied. The cycle continues. If it's satisfied, then obviously there's no eviction, right? So, what happens if the origin of a desire to evict them has nothing to do with the rent? So, that would bring you to your second question. If your desire to evict the tenant is not based on a failure to pay rent, it's based on something else under the lease, or something else that was violated that was required under the lease, that's the second question, right? So on the first bucket, right, you want to evict the tenant, was it rent related? No. Okay. Second bucket, what under the lease was violated, right? Or under what provision are you seeking this eviction, right? So that's going to be a yes or no answer, right? So, if that's the case, then the next question is going to be, what does the lease say, right? So, let's say there's, let's put it this way, they failed to cure a defect. They were having a party in the building, and they accidentally broke a window, and the lease says they got to repair the window. What does the lease say? right? The lease should speak about the opportunity to cure, if there is an opportunity to cure, how many days they have to cure, what kind of notice you have to give them if there's a material breach, or if this is a material breach, or whatever the case is. So we look at the lease, see what the lease says. Does the lease have any notice provisions, right? So if the lease has notice provisions, you follow the notice provisions as spelled out in the lease. If the lease does not have a notice provision, if it says, if the lease is silent, okay? And this is a general rule for all contract law. If the contract is silent, if the lease is silent, the law will use gap fillers, right? So in Florida, if the lease is silent as to the notice provision required for some kind of default or violation in the lease, in Florida is a general 7-day notice period. Okay, there's a statutory 7-day notice period in Florida. So they violated some provision of the lease. The lease says nothing about a notice period, and so what happens is the statutory general 7-day notice period picks up. Okay, so the next question is, do they cure within the 7 days? If they cure within the 7 days, then you're good. If they don't cure within the 7 days, then they're bad. Then you got to move forward. You have to file, then you got to determine whether if you're looking for simply possession of the property back, meaning you evict the tenant and you simply take the property back, or are you looking for possession plus damages? So I'm looking to take the property back, plus you owe me $50,000 or whatever the case is, right? So we're going down the pipeline, right? So we're starting again. You want to evict. Is it rent related? Is it something non-rent related? Here we are, it's non-rent related. Is there notice required for whatever default you're talking about? If yes, follow the rules. If no, 7-day period. Do they cure within these rules? If yes, you're good. If no, we move into litigation. You gave them the 7-day notice period, or whatever statutory notice period, whatever statutory or contract notice period that they were required to have. So now you file your complaint. Your complaint's either going to be for possession, where you get the property back, you evict them, you take back the property, or possession and damages. You take the property back, you get a couple of bucks. Okay? Florida has a very quick process. When you file your complaint, you're sending it to the residents, you're showing them the lease terms, you're explaining the lease terms to the court, you're explaining why it's a default under the lease, and then you're just adhering to the notice period under the lease, and then you serve. So remember, the 5 things are going to be you're referencing the residents and the tenant, you're referencing the lease terms, and you're referencing the portions of the lease to the court. Okay, you're referencing the default under the lease, where the default was, what the tenant did wrong, and then you're referencing the notice period according to the lease, or the 7-day statutory period. You're noticing it to the court. You have 5 that you give the tenant personal service of that. Here's your complaint for possession and damages. You've been served. Here's personal service. They have 5 days to respond. If they don't have 5 days, if they don't respond in 5 days, that's default. If it's default, they gotta go. Florida doesn't play games. It's a very quick process. In New York, we have something called summary proceedings. But if you've been following the rules, if you've been following the TV and the media in New York, you realize that we don't do any proceedings anymore. In New York, if you're a landlord, you essentially have no ability to defend yourself as a landlord. But in Florida, that's not the case. So, that was the purpose of this video, just to give everybody a quick run through on how on how the eviction proceedings work in Florida. I mean, this has come up because a lot of people in New York are moving down to Florida, like a lot of people, and they're not familiar with the rules. They're not familiar with the process in Florida. New York has always had a very quick statutory kind of like notice to terminate situation here. I think they're called summary proceedings, but they're simply not doing them anymore in New York. I mean, I think the moratorium has just been endless, and now it's going on until October 31st, and it's likely going to be extended again, right? So while a lot of New Yorkers are moving down to Florida, this kind of is like critical information for them that they didn't have ahead of time, so they just they familiarize themselves with it, and they're able to take care of it. At some point in the future, we'll talk a little bit more. I mean, some things come up, right? So for instance, like issues of foreclosure, issues of bankruptcy, with foreclosure, right? There's I can't remember the statute. We'll cover it in another video. We'll cover that. But there's Trump signed something into law that gave him a uniform 90 days to get the whole process done. You have issues of bankruptcy, depending on what kind of bankruptcy it is. Is it Chapter 7? Is it Chapter 13? If it's like Chapter 7, they have like a 60-day period to either assume or reject the lease. Otherwise, it's just considered rejected. So there are a couple of nuances, and we'll come to the nuances. But I just really wanted this video just to explain the process in what needs to happen in Florida, because so many New Yorkers are moving down to Florida. So many New Yorkers are buying property in Florida that they may not be familiar with the rules. So, I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned a little bit something from this. And, don't be afraid. First of all, if you're in Florida, you're in a much better place. DeSantis is much more normal than anything that's up here in New York. And you actually still are able to live a normal, decent life down there. So, without further ado, I will end this video here. Yours in love, lifts in law, Vinny Miletti. Miletti Law, the strongest name in law, the most jacked attorney in NYC. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, existential questions on life, I'm here. Have a beautiful day, everybody.